People often mistake intelligence for the ability to overpower others in conversation. They think the sharper response, the stronger argument, or the better evidence automatically belongs to the more powerful person. But real life does not work that way. Some of the most emotionally exhausted people are the ones constantly trying to prove themselves to minds that were never open in the first place. Every pointless argument steals something quietly: peace, focus, clarity. And the moment someone gains control over your emotions, your attention, or your inner calm, the conversation is no longer about truth. It becomes about ego, pride, and emotional dominance. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly not to become like the chaos around him. Not because the world would suddenly become reasonable, but because protecting your inner state is one of the highest forms of discipline a person can develop. Some people spend years carrying conversations in their heads long after they end. They replay words while driving, working, or trying to sleep. They lose energy trying to explain themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. Meanwhile, the other person has already moved on emotionally. That is the hidden cost of foolish conflict. It follows you long after the moment itself has passed. Stoicism teaches a different path, a quieter one, the path of restraint, clarity, and emotional control. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every insult deserves your response. And not every battle deserves access to your peace. Real strength is not becoming cold or emotionless. It is learning how to remain steady while surrounded by people who constantly lose control of themselves. Because true intelligence is not measured by how loudly someone defends themselves. It is measured by how little foolishness can disturb their peace. There is always a subtle moment when a conversation stops being about understanding and starts becoming a contest of emotion. At first, everything appears calm. The exchange feels reasonable enough to continue. You explain yourself carefully, choosing your words with patience because part of you still believes clarity can repair the tension. The other person nods occasionally, maybe even pretends to listen. And for a brief moment it feels like the conversation might actually lead somewhere useful. Then the atmosphere shifts, their tone sharpens, your words begin returning distorted. Simple explanations are treated like personal attacks. Facts no longer matter because the conversation is no longer connected to facts at all. It becomes connected to pride. And pride has a strange ability to turn even intelligent people into prisoners of their own emotions. Most people do not notice this shift immediately because they are too focused on defending themselves. They assume persistence will solve the problem. If they explain one more time, perhaps the misunderstanding will disappear. If they provide stronger logic, perhaps the other person will finally become reasonable. But the harder they push for resolution, the further the conversation drifts from it. Emotional people rarely calm down because someone presents better evidence. In many cases, evidence feels threatening because accepting it would require humility, and humility is difficult for a mind deeply attached to being right. This is why pointless arguments become exhausting so quickly. One person is attempting to create clarity while the other is attempting to protect identity. Those are completely different goals, and conversations built on opposing goals eventually collapse under frustration. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology attempted to explain it. Epictetus reminded his students that suffering begins when people try to control what does not belong to them. Another person's reactions do not belong to you. Their ego does not belong to you. Their inability to listen is not your responsibility to repair. Yet many people spend years carrying the emotional burden of conversations they never had the power to fix in the first place. They replay arguments in their minds while driving, working, or trying to sleep. They imagine sharper responses, better timing, different words. Meanwhile, the person who created the chaos has already moved on emotionally, leaving them alone with unresolved frustration. The argument ends externally, but internally it continues for hours. The mind keeps searching for closure where closure does not exist. Part of wisdom is recognizing when a conversation has become emotionally contaminated. This does not mean becoming cold or detached from humanity. It simply means understanding the limits of reason. Some individuals do not enter discussions seeking truth. They enter seeking victory, attention, or emotional release. Their anger becomes the center of the interaction. Everything else starts orbiting around it. The moment you become emotionally reactive, their chaos starts shaping your behavior. Your breathing changes. Your thoughts accelerate. Your attention narrows. Suddenly your peace becomes dependent on convincing someone who has already decided not to understand you. That is the trap. And many intelligent people fall into it because they confuse emotional endurance with emotional mastery. Continuing a pointless argument is not strength. Sometimes it is simply attachment disguised as determination. This is why silence can become a form of discipline rather than avoidance. Silence is often misunderstood because people associate it with weakness or surrender. In reality, silence can reflect enormous self-control. It takes far more awareness to remain composed than it does to react impulsively. Anyone can raise their voice. Anyone can defend their pride. That idea sounds simple on the surface, yet it becomes incredibly difficult in practice because human beings are naturally emotional creatures. The desire to correct, defend, and prove ourselves runs deep. Silence interrupts that instinct. It creates space between feeling and reaction, and within that space, clarity begins returning. Silence feels difficult for most people because human beings are deeply attached to the way they are perceived. The moment someone challenges their intelligence, questions their character, or dismisses their opinion, something emotional rises almost instantly beneath the surface. Pride tightens, thoughts accelerate. The mind begins preparing responses before the other person has even finished speaking. Many people mistake this reaction for strength because modern culture celebrates quick comebacks and emotional intensity. Yet beneath that reaction is usually fear. Fear of appearing weak. Fear of losing status. Fear of being misunderstood by people whose opinions may not even deserve that level of emotional importance. This is why so many conversations become emotionally exhausting. People are not only defending ideas, they are defending identity. The Stoics recognized this weakness clearly. They understood that emotional reactions often reveal dependency rather than power. A person who cannot remain calm when challenged becomes controlled by the behavior of others without realizing it. It narrows perception and pushes people toward actions they later regret. That is why he believed delay was one of the highest forms of discipline. Even a few seconds of silence can interrupt the emotional momentum of a situation. A pause creates distance between instinct and action, and within that distance, clarity has room to return again. Most foolish individuals depend entirely on the absence of that pause. They provoke, exaggerate, interrupt, and pressure because emotional reactions give them influence. The moment someone becomes visibly frustrated, they gain confirmation that their words are controlling the atmosphere. This is why calmness changes interactions so dramatically. When someone expects resistance but receives composure instead, confusion begins appearing almost immediately. Emotional people often prepare themselves for conflict long before conversations begin. They expect defensiveness, tension, and escalation because those patterns are familiar to them. But calm restraint interrupts the pattern they expected to follow. Suddenly, their emotional energy has nowhere to land. Their contradictions become visible. Their impatience reveals itself naturally. Insecurity starts leaking through every sentence. People reveal themselves most clearly when they are no longer receiving the emotional reaction they hope to control. This is why silence becomes psychologically powerful. It forces reality to continue unfolding without interference. Most people underestimate how much information exists beneath emotional behavior. Someone who constantly interrupts may not be protecting truth at all. They may simply fear losing emotional dominance. Someone who becomes aggressive over small disagreements may not feel confident internally, despite how confident they appear externally. Emotional instability always reveals itself eventually, but reactive people become too distracted defending themselves to notice these signals clearly. Their focus narrows entirely around proving a point, while the calmer person continues observing. The Stoics valued observation because observation creates understanding without emotional attachment. Once emotions stop controlling perception, people become easier to understand honestly. This is also why emotionally disciplined individuals often appear more powerful without trying to dominate anyone directly. Calmness affects environments differently. While others rush emotionally from one reaction to another, they remain grounded. Their words feel slower, more intentional, more controlled. They do not feed unnecessary tension because they are no longer addicted to emotional stimulation. In a world where many people mistake intensity for confidence, restraint becomes unusually powerful. The person who remains composed during difficult moments often becomes the emotional center of the room without ever demanding attention. Their stability influences others quietly, because calmness exposes how unstable unnecessary reactions truly are. Over time, this discipline changes the way conflict is experienced internally. Situations that once felt deeply personal begin appearing smaller and less threatening. Criticism loses much of its emotional power because self-worth is no longer entirely dependent on external approval. Provocation becomes easier to observe without immediately reacting to it. The behavior of foolish people stops feeling like an attack on identity and starts looking more like a reflection of their own internal condition. And once that shift happens fully, something important changes inside the mind. Peace stops feeling fragile. It becomes intentional, quiet, controlled, protected carefully from people who have never learned how to protect their own inner world. If calmness, clarity, and self-mastery are qualities worth building, consider subscribing and continuing this journey. Because a peaceful mind is not found accidentally, it is trained deliberately. Something interesting happens when you stop feeding emotional conflict with constant resistance. People often reveal themselves more clearly. Without opposition to energize them, their exaggerations become obvious. Their contradictions become visible. The performance slowly collapses under its own weight because emotional chaos depends on participation. One calm person can completely alter the direction of an interaction simply by refusing to mirror the instability in front of them. This does not guarantee peace every time. Some people remain committed to misunderstanding others no matter how calmly they are treated. Still, protecting your inner stability matters more than winning temporary approval from someone trapped inside their own emotions. The Stoics believed character was built through repeated moments of restraint, especially when restraint felt difficult. Every unnecessary argument offers a quiet choice. You can continue sacrificing your peace trying to force understanding, or you can recognize that not every mind is prepared for reason at the same moment. Once that realization settles deeply, silence stops feeling empty. It starts feeling intentional. Over time, this changes the way you move through the world. You stop treating every disagreement like a personal threat and start protecting your attention with greater care. Calmness becomes less about appearing unaffected and more about refusing to hand emotional control to people who have never learned how to manage themselves with wisdom or restraint. Silence feels difficult for most people because human beings are deeply attached to the way they are perceived. The moment someone challenges their intelligence, questions their character, or dismisses their opinion, something emotional begins rising beneath the surface almost instantly. Pride tightens, thoughts accelerate. The mind starts searching for responses before the other person has even finished speaking. Many people interpret this reaction as strength because modern culture often praises quick comebacks and aggressive confidence. Yet beneath that reaction is usually fear. Fear of appearing weak, fear of losing status, fear of being misunderstood by people whose opinions may not even deserve that level of emotional importance. This is why so many conversations become emotionally exhausting. People are not only defending ideas, they are defending their sense of self. The Stoics recognized this weakness clearly. They understood that emotional reactions often reveal dependency rather than power. A person who cannot remain calm when challenged becomes controlled by the behavior of others without realizing it. Seneca warned repeatedly about the danger of anger because anger creates temporary blindness. It narrows perception and pushes people toward actions they later regret. That is why he believed delay was one of the most powerful forms of discipline. Even a few seconds of silence can interrupt the emotional momentum of a situation. A pause creates distance between instinct and action. Within that distance, clarity has room to return. Most foolish individuals depend entirely on the absence of that pause. They provoke, interrupt, exaggerate, and pressure because emotional reactions give them influence. The moment someone becomes visibly frustrated, they gain confirmation that their words are controlling the emotional atmosphere. This is why calmness changes interactions so dramatically. When someone expects resistance but receives composure instead, confusion begins appearing almost immediately. Emotional people often prepare themselves for conflict long before conversations even begin. They expect arguments, defensiveness, and emotional escalation because those patterns are familiar to them. But calm restraint interrupts the pattern they were expecting to follow. Suddenly, their emotional energy has nowhere to land. The conversation starts revealing things they never intended to expose. Their impatience becomes obvious. Their contradictions begin slipping into the open. Insecurity starts appearing between sentences. People reveal themselves most clearly when they are no longer receiving the emotional reaction they were hoping to control. This is why silence can become psychologically powerful. It forces reality to continue unfolding without interference. Most people underestimate how much information exists beneath someone's tone, timing, and emotional intensity. Words matter, but emotional behavior often reveals far more than language itself. Someone who constantly interrupts may not be protecting truth at all. They may simply fear losing emotional dominance. Someone who becomes aggressive over small disagreements may not feel confident internally, despite how confident they appear externally. Emotional instability always leaks outward eventually. The problem is that reactive people become too distracted by defending themselves to notice these signals clearly. Their focus narrows completely around proving a point. Meanwhile, the calmer person continues observing. The Stoics valued observation because observation creates understanding without emotional attachment. This does not mean accepting disrespect passively or allowing harmful behavior to continue endlessly. Wisdom still requires boundaries. Some situations demand direct action and clear communication. But there is a difference between intentional response and emotional surrender. One is guided by clarity. The other is guided by wounded pride pretending to be strength. Foolish people rarely recognize this difference because they confuse emotional intensity with authority. They assume louder reactions create greater influence. In reality, emotional control often carries far more presence than emotional force. A calm person changes the atmosphere of a room without raising their voice because composure naturally creates psychological weight. People notice steadiness instinctively. They trust it more than chaos, even when they cannot fully explain why. Over time, this discipline transforms the way conflict is experienced internally. Conversations that once felt threatening begin losing their emotional grip. The urge to correct everyone weakens. The need to prove intelligence starts fading. More energy becomes available for things that genuinely matter because less attention is wasted feeding unnecessary tension. Silence no longer feels like suppression. It begins feeling like freedom. That freedom is difficult to describe until it is experienced. The mind becomes quieter. Reactions slow down. Other people's chaos stops entering into your thoughts. And once discipline becomes habitual, something unexpected happens. You stop fearing foolish people because their behavior no longer controls the direction of your inner state. The strange thing about pointless arguments is that they often continue long after the conversation itself has ended. The words stop. The people separate. Life appears to move forward normally from the outside, yet internally something remains unsettled. The mind keeps returning to the interaction, searching for resolution that never truly arrives. You replay certain sentences while driving through traffic. You think about different responses while trying to concentrate at work. Sometimes the argument follows you into quiet moments at night when everything else becomes still. The other person may already be focused on something entirely different, but part of your attention remains trapped inside a conversation that produced nothing except emotional fatigue. This is why foolish conflicts are so costly. They rarely damage your life in one dramatic moment. They drain it slowly through repetition, distraction, and mental exhaustion. Most people underestimate how much energy attention actually consumes. The mind cannot endlessly carry emotional tension without consequences. Every unnecessary conflict occupies space that could have been used for reflection, creativity, discipline, or peace. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He reminded himself constantly that life was short and attention was limited. To waste mental clarity on the endless irrationality of others was, in his view, a quiet form of self-destruction. That idea becomes uncomfortable once it is examined honestly, because many people spend enormous portions of their lives emotionally reacting to individuals who contribute nothing meaningful to their growth. One careless conversation can dominate an entire afternoon. A single insult can poison a person's mood for hours. The emotional impact continues because the mind keeps reopening the wound, searching for a way to regain control over something that has already passed. This is where emotional distance becomes necessary, not coldness, not arrogance. Distance in the sense of maintaining psychological separation between your state of mind and the emotional storms surrounding you. A calm person can witness frustration without absorbing it completely. They can listen without becoming consumed. They can observe irrational behavior without feeling personally responsible for fixing every broken interaction. That ability changes everything because it interrupts emotional contagion before it takes control. Most people unknowingly mirror the emotional energy around them. Anger creates anger. Anxiety creates anxiety. Defensiveness creates more defensiveness. But a disciplined mind learns how to pause before unconsciously participating in the emotional pattern unfolding in front of it. That pause creates freedom. It allows a person to decide whether the situation deserves further attention or deserves to end quietly without resistance. There is a subtle strength that begins developing once this discipline becomes part of daily life. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin losing intensity. The opinions of difficult people stop carrying the same emotional weight. Criticism no longer lingers in the mind for entire days because the attachment to proving yourself slowly weakens. This does not happen instantly. The ego continues fighting for attention for a long time. It wants validation. It wants fairness. It wants the final word. Yet wisdom often appears the moment those impulses stop controlling behavior automatically. Epictetus taught that people suffer more from their judgments than from reality itself, and nowhere is this clearer than in unnecessary conflict. The mind keeps amplifying situations long after the original moment has passed. It creates stories, assumptions, and emotional replay loops that deepen exhaustion instead of resolving it. That steadiness changes the way time itself feels. Conversations stop echoing endlessly inside the mind because you no longer treat every conflict like a threat to your identity. You begin recovering emotional energy that was previously wasted on resentment, explanation, and silent frustration. The world becomes quieter internally, more focused, more intentional. This is why disciplined people often appear calmer than everyone around them. They are not untouched by difficulty. They have learned that preserving peace requires refusing emotional invitations. The foolish person continues searching for reactions, but a mind trained in restraint no longer feels obligated to participate in every storm placed in front of it. This becomes especially important in difficult social situations because emotions spread quickly between people. One tense conversation can change the atmosphere of an entire room within seconds. One emotionally unstable person can influence the mood of everyone around them without even realizing it. Human beings absorb emotional energy constantly. Stress transfers through tone, facial expressions, interruptions, impatience, and body language. The Stoics understood this deeply, which is why they treated the inner world like something that needed protection, not isolation from life, but awareness within it. They knew that a person who cannot regulate themselves becomes vulnerable to the emotional state of whoever happens to be standing in front of them. And once someone else controls your emotional direction, they begin influencing your decisions, your focus, and eventually your peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote many private reminders to himself about this exact problem. He knew that the world would always contain impatient, arrogant, dishonest, and emotionally driven individuals. His goal was not to control their behavior. His goal was to make sure their behavior did not control him. That distinction changes everything once it is understood clearly. Many people spend their lives trying to manage external chaos while completely neglecting the chaos inside themselves. They become obsessed with changing others because they never learned how to remain steady on their own. Stoicism reverses that focus completely. It teaches that inner stability matters more than external victory. A person who loses emotional control during every conflict may appear powerful in the moment, but internally they are being controlled by circumstances they never learned to navigate wisely. This does not mean becoming passive or emotionally distant from life. Discipline is not avoidance. A calm person can still speak firmly when necessary. They can still set boundaries. They can still walk away from disrespect without becoming emotionally consumed by it. The difference is that their actions come from clarity instead of emotional flooding. Most impulsive reactions feel powerful in the moment, but create regret later because they were driven by temporary emotion rather than thoughtful judgment. Stoicism encourages awareness before expression. It teaches people to examine their emotional state carefully before allowing it to shape their behavior. That habit alone can transform relationships, decisions, and the overall quality of a person's inner life. Over time, this kind of restraint creates a presence that others notice immediately, even if they cannot explain it clearly. Calm people affect environments differently. While others rush emotionally from one reaction to another, they remain grounded. Their words feel slower, more intentional, and more controlled. They do not feed unnecessary tension because they are no longer addicted to emotional stimulation. In a world where many people mistake intensity for confidence, restraint becomes unusually powerful. The person who stays composed during difficult moments often becomes the emotional center of the room without ever demanding attention. Their stability influences others quietly because calmness has a way of exposing how unstable unnecessary reactions truly are. And once that discipline becomes natural, foolish behavior stops feeling personally threatening. It simply becomes another reminder of how rare emotional control actually is. There is another side to foolish behavior that many people fail to notice because they become too emotionally involved to observe it clearly. Not every conflict begins because someone truly cares about truth, principles, or understanding. Sometimes conflict exists Because attention itself feels emotionally rewarding to certain people, the tension becomes their source of significance. The moment they provoke frustration, anger, or defensiveness from someone else, they feel powerful. Your reaction becomes proof that they matter. This is why some individuals continue escalating conversations long after the original issue has lost meaning. The argument itself becomes secondary. What they truly seek is emotional influence. They want to feel capable of disturbing another person's peace because that disturbance temporarily gives them a sense of control they struggle to create internally. People who constantly seek emotional dominance are rarely as secure as they appear. Truly grounded individuals do not need to win every disagreement because their identity is not dependent on external validation. They can listen without feeling threatened. They can disagree without becoming emotionally unstable. They do not need to humiliate others to protect their sense of self. But insecure minds operate differently. Every disagreement feels dangerous because it challenges the fragile image they are desperately trying to maintain. This is why some individuals react so intensely to small corrections or differing opinions. Their ego interprets disagreement as humiliation. Instead of examining themselves honestly, they attempt to regain emotional control through louder reactions, sharper insults, or manipulative behavior. The aggression looks powerful externally, but internally it usually comes from fear. The Stoics understood fear better than most people realize. They believed much of human behavior is driven by unconscious attempts to avoid discomfort. Some people chase status because they fear insignificance. Others chase control because uncertainty terrifies them. Emotional aggression often emerges from the same place. A person who cannot regulate themselves internally begins trying to regulate the emotions of everyone around them instead. They create tension because tension makes them feel temporarily important. Yet the strange thing about this pattern is that it eventually becomes its own punishment. People trapped in constant emotional conflict rarely experience genuine peace. Their minds remain restless. Their relationships become unstable. Their emotional state depends entirely on external reactions they cannot fully control. They spend their lives fighting battles that never actually satisfy them. Recognizing this changes anger in subtle ways. The desire to retaliate weakens because you begin seeing the emotional suffering hidden beneath foolish behavior. Again, this does not mean tolerating disrespect endlessly or abandoning boundaries. Wisdom still requires discernment. Some people should be distanced from carefully because their instability becomes destructive over time, but hatred becomes harder to sustain once understanding deepens. Compassion begins replacing emotional hostility because you realize many difficult people are already trapped inside minds that constantly disturb them. Their anger punishes them long before it reaches anyone else. Their insecurity follows them into every interaction. Their need for attention keeps them emotionally dependent on reactions from others. In many ways, they carry their suffering everywhere without understanding its source. That perspective creates patience, not naive patience. Realistic patience grounded in awareness of human imperfection. Every person carries unseen fears, unresolved wounds, and emotional habits developed over years of unconscious repetition. Some confront those patterns honestly. Others spend their entire lives projecting them outward through conflict and control. The disciplined mind learns how to notice this without becoming emotionally consumed by it. Observation replaces immediate judgment. Clarity replaces impulsive reaction. And gradually the emotional grip of foolish behavior weakens because understanding dissolves much of the illusion surrounding it. This creates a kind of emotional independence that many people never fully experience. The opinions of unstable individuals lose their power to define your inner state. Their attempts to provoke no longer feel irresistible because you recognize the deeper motivation underneath the performance. What once looked intimidating begins looking fragile instead. The need to constantly defend yourself fades because you stop viewing every emotional outburst as something requiring your participation. And within that shift, there is quiet freedom. The world still contains foolishness, insecurity, and emotional chaos, but you no longer feel obligated to carry those things inside your own mind every time you encounter them. One of the hardest disciplines to develop is the ability to remain patient when something false is spoken with confidence. The instinct to react appears immediately. The mind wants to correct the misunderstanding before it spreads further. It wants to defend itself against distortion, criticism, or dishonesty before silence is mistaken for weakness. Modern life encourages this impulse constantly. People react within seconds. Opinions are formed instantly. Every disagreement becomes a performance where speed is treated like intelligence. The loudest response often receives the most attention, which creates the illusion that immediate reaction is always necessary. But the Stoics viewed this very differently. They understood that truth does not become stronger because someone defends it emotionally. In many situations, emotional urgency actually weakens clarity because it pulls the mind away from patience and into impulsive behavior. Wisdom tends to move more slowly than emotion because wisdom is willing to observe before acting. Emotional people rush because they are uncomfortable with uncertainty. They feel pressure to regain control immediately. The Stoics believed this pressure often creates unnecessary suffering because not every false statement requires direct confrontation. Not every misunderstanding needs instant correction. Sometimes reality reveals what arguments never could. A person may appear convincing for a short period of time. They may speak confidently, manipulate perception, or attract emotional agreement from others. But confidence alone cannot permanently hide inconsistency. Eventually, actions begin exposing what words attempted to conceal. Contradictions appear naturally over time because reality does not adjust itself to protect ego forever. What is unstable eventually reveals its instability. What is dishonest eventually becomes difficult to maintain. The Stoics trusted this process deeply. Most people struggle with patience because they secretly believe they are responsible for forcing others to understand the truth immediately. They carry conversations in their minds long after they end because they feel unfinished internally. The desire to explain becomes obsessive. The mind keeps imagining better responses, stronger arguments, clearer wording. Yet beneath all of this mental activity is usually the same emotional attachment. The ego wants recognition, it wants validation, it wants reassurance that misunderstanding will not damage identity or reputation. But there is something exhausting about living this way constantly. The nervous system never rests because it remains trapped in continuous emotional defense. Every foolish comment feels like something requiring immediate action. Every disagreement becomes emotionally heavy. Over time, this creates mental fatigue that slowly drains clarity from everyday life. The Stoics believed much of this exhaustion comes from misunderstanding what truly belongs within our control. Another person's perception is not fully controllable. Their emotional maturity is not controllable. Their willingness to see clearly is not controllable either. Once this is accepted honestly, a certain psychological freedom begins appearing. You stop carrying the impossible responsibility of correcting every confused mind around you. You stop feeling obligated to force understanding where resistance already exists. This does not mean abandoning truth or pretending falsehood no longer matters. It simply means recognizing that reality itself continues working quietly even when you are no longer emotionally fighting on its behalf. Time reveals people eventually. Character reveals itself through repeated behavior. Emotional instability exposes itself without needing constant commentary from others. There is enormous strength hidden inside that realization because patience requires confidence. A person who constantly reacts impulsively often reveals insecurity more than certainty. They fear silence because silence feels vulnerable to them. But disciplined individuals understand something different. They understand that truth rarely depends on emotional performance for survival. Observation often sees farther than emotional urgency. While reactive people rush into conflict trying to force immediate resolution, patient people continue watching patterns unfold naturally. Over time, those patterns become impossible to ignore. This changes the emotional atmosphere inside the mind completely. Instead of feeling personally threatened by every foolish opinion, you begin recognizing that many things correct themselves eventually without your interference. Arrogance carries consequences. Dishonesty creates instability. Emotional impulsiveness damages trust over time. People reveal their inner condition through consistency, not isolated moments. The patient mind understands this and stops becoming emotionally consumed by temporary appearances. Someone may look powerful while behaving recklessly today, but recklessness eventually produces visible consequences. Someone may manipulate perception temporarily, but false performances become difficult to maintain forever. Reality continues applying pressure quietly until contradictions begin surfacing on their own. Once patience becomes part of your thinking, emotional reactions begin slowing down naturally. The urge to interrupt, defend, or retaliate immediately weakens because you no longer believe every situation depends entirely on your emotional involvement. Silence becomes easier. Observation becomes clearer. You start noticing how often emotionally reactive people destroy their own credibility through unnecessary intensity alone. They expose their instability while trying desperately to appear strong. Meanwhile, calm individuals remain grounded because they are no longer addicted to immediate validation. Their confidence comes from something quieter, something steadier. This does not mean passive avoidance or endless tolerance for harmful behavior. Some situations still require direct action. Some boundaries still need protection. Wisdom includes discernment. But there is a profound difference between intentional action and emotional compulsion. One emerges from clarity, the other emerges from fear disguised as urgency. The Stoics constantly practiced separating these two states internally because they understood how easily emotional pressure can distort judgment. A calm mind sees situations more accurately than an agitated one. Eventually, this discipline transforms the way conflict is experienced altogether. You stop feeling emotionally rushed by the opinions of unstable people. You stop treating every misunderstanding like a threat to your identity. Instead, you allow time to reveal what temporary arguments cannot resolve. And within that patience there is quiet authority, because true confidence rarely feels the need to scream for recognition. The Stoics returned constantly to a much quieter question whenever conflict appeared in their lives. What actually matters here? Not what feels satisfying for a few temporary moments, not what protects pride in front of others. What genuinely improves the quality of your life in the long run? This question changes the entire direction of thought because it interrupts emotional momentum before it fully takes control. Most impulsive reactions feel important only in the moment. Hours later, they often appear unnecessary, exhausting, or even embarrassing. A sharp response may protect pride temporarily while damaging peace for the rest of the day. A person may win an argument publicly while privately carrying frustration, resentment, and mental exhaustion long afterward. The Stoics understood that emotional victories often come with hidden costs that people notice too late. Many individuals spend enormous amounts of energy trying to prove themselves to people who have already decided not to understand them. They explain repeatedly. They defend every detail. They chase validation from minds completely closed to reflection. Over time, this creates emotional dependency because peace becomes tied to external approval. If others misunderstand them, they feel disturbed internally. If someone criticizes them unfairly, their emotional state collapses. This is why so many people live reactively without realizing it. Their inner world changes constantly based on the opinions, moods, and behavior of those around them. Stoicism teaches something radically different. It teaches that inner stability cannot depend entirely on external agreement. Otherwise, your peace will always belong to whoever happens to provoke you most effectively. There is something deeply liberating about no longer needing every person to approve of your perspective. Not because you become careless or arrogant, but because you begin understanding the limits of control. You cannot force maturity into someone emotionally committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot force wisdom into someone addicted to conflict. You cannot force clarity into a mind overwhelmed by ego. Once this becomes fully accepted, emotional reactions begin slowing down naturally. The need to prove yourself weakens. Silence becomes easier. Walking away feels less like defeat and more like intelligence. The mind stops chasing unnecessary battles because it finally understands that not every disagreement deserves emotional investment. This does not mean abandoning standards or refusing to stand up for yourself when truly necessary. The Stoics were not passive people. They simply believed actions should emerge from clarity rather than wounded pride. There is a difference between calm strength and emotional reactivity pretending to be strength. One creates stability, the other creates endless tension. Most foolish arguments become destructive because both individuals are trying to protect identity at the same time. Neither side pauses long enough to ask whether the conflict is actually meaningful. They become trapped in the emotional urgency of the moment. But disciplined people learn how to separate temporary emotional satisfaction from long-term peace. That separation changes everything because it allows decisions to become intentional rather than impulsive. Over time, this creates a completely different relationship with conflict itself. Situations that once felt deeply personal begin appearing smaller and less threatening. Criticism loses much of its emotional power because self-worth is no longer entirely dependent on external perception. Provocation becomes easier to observe without immediately reacting to it. The behavior of foolish people stops feeling like an attack on your identity and starts looking more like a reflection of their own internal state. This shift may sound subtle, yet it transforms daily life profoundly. The mind becomes quieter, attention becomes more focused. Emotional energy stops leaking into pointless struggles that produce nothing except exhaustion. Anyone can appear calm when life feels easy. Real discipline appears when frustration, disrespect, or foolishness enters the environment and the mind still remains steady. That steadiness is not emotional suppression. It is awareness strong enough to prevent temporary emotions from controlling permanent behavior. And once that awareness becomes consistent, the world starts looking very different. You stop measuring strength by how aggressively someone argues or how effectively they dominate conversations. Many loud people are internally fragile. Many reactive people are emotionally dependent on conflict. Real strength begins appearing quieter than most people expect. The strongest individuals often feel no urgent need to prove themselves constantly because their identity is not built on external victory. They are focused on protecting something far more valuable than pride: their clarity, their discipline, their peace of mind. They understand that every unnecessary emotional battle steals attention from things that genuinely matter. Growth requires energy, wisdom requires reflection, purpose requires focus. Foolish conflict consumes all three without offering anything meaningful in return. And this is why disciplined people become increasingly selective about where they place their attention over time. Eventually, a deeper kind of freedom begins emerging from this way of living. You stop chasing validation from unstable people. You stop explaining yourself endlessly to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop reacting automatically every time someone attempts to provoke emotion from you. Instead, you move more carefully through the world, more intentionally, more calmly. The behavior of others still exists, but it no longer controls your internal direction. And once you reach that point, something important becomes clear. Peace was never found in defeating foolish people. It was found in refusing to let them govern your inner state. At the end of the day, foolish people will always exist. There will always be those who seek conflict, attention, and emotional control. But the moment you stop allowing their chaos to enter your mind, you take your power back. Real strength is not found in winning every argument. It is found in remaining calm while others lose themselves emotionally. The Stoics understood that peace is not weakness. It is discipline, quiet, controlled, and unshaken. If this message stayed with you, take a moment to watch one of the videos on the screen. Continue building the kind of mind that cannot be easily disturbed by the noise of the world. And thank you for being part of Stoic Journal.